Part 80. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 791. Xiejin said, "Your Highness will find a way by himself." Hao pouted. On the way back to the palace, Xiejin took Hao for a tour of the market. It was a lively time at this time, with the cries of vendors, the tinkling of rattles, and everything in between selling food, entertainment, and household goods on both sides of the street. There was an endless stream of pedestrians, including common people wearing commoners and dignitaries wearing brocade robes and jade belts. Xiejin rode his horse slowly through the market and came to a candy seller's stall. He lowered his head and asked, "Hao, do you want a candy man?" Hao was still young and was very curious about the candy figures made into various shapes. Hearing this, he nodded, "I want to, and take one for my brother." Xiejin smiled, "No." "Why?" "The weather is hot, so this will melt easily." Xiejin lowered his head and said, "And we can buy one and play with it, but we can't eat it." Hao frowned and wanted to ask why, but Xiejin said, "What style do you want?" Hao glanced at the various shapes of candy figures on the stall. "Tiger." So Xiejin gave the boss 2 copper coins and bought a candy man for Hao to hold. He rode his horse and continued walking forward. When he came to a place where pots were thrown, Hao stretched out his hand and said, "What are they doing?" "Toss the pot." "What is pitching pot?" "It's an interesting game." Xiejin stopped while holding the reins and threw an arrow from a man's hand neatly into the pot. "Did you see it? It's just like this. If you don't throw it in, you lose. This requires training your eyesight. And learn to control the force on your arms, and you can hit easily if you master the skills." Hao said to express his understanding. "It's too late, let's go back." Xiejin said, "We can come out to play another day when we have time." Arriving at a place with few people in front, Xiejin sped up his horse and asked in a low voice, "Hao, did you see the copper coins I just used to buy the candy man?" "I saw it. People work hard to make money. Most of the people buy things with copper coins. Usually when you see your father or mother giving money to ministers in the Taisho Palace, you may think that silver is the most commonly spent money, but it is not." Xiejin said, "Most common people can only earn more than 10 or 20 taels of silver a year. They live very frugally and cannot spend money randomly. When using money, they should change their silver into copper coins for convenience, unless they need to buy expensive things. Use money." Hao nodded, "Oh." Xiejin held the reins with one hand and touched his head with one hand. "Uncle Jin talked too much tonight. Hao may not be able to remember them all, but it doesn't matter, we will come out and take a look when we have time later. Slowly I understand everything." Hao raised the candy man in his hand. "Why can't you eat this?" "Because Hao has a distinguished status, he cannot eat food outside the palace." Xiejin said, "What if someone poisons me?" Hao frowned. "That vendor is just an ordinary citizen, why would he poison him?" "It's not why he poisoned him, but just in case." Xiejin said with a smile, "This sugar man is actually not poisonous, but until Hao himself can't distinguish right from wrong, good and evil, and doesn't have enough ability to protect himself, you can't eat anything from outside, that's the rule." Hao thought thoughtfully, then nodded, "Yes." It was already getting late, so Xiejin sped up and returned to the inner city, galloping all the way, allowing Hao to enjoy the feeling of galloping against the wind again. After arriving at the palace gate and stopping his horse, Xiejin took Hao off the horse and walked into the palace gate. He saw several cabinet ministers walking out of the palace. They met head-on and were stunned. Xie Shaofu was the first to speak. "What is this for?" "His Royal Highness the Crown Prince." A cabinet minister was shocked when he saw the child in Xiejin's arms. "Did Mr. Xie take the Crown Prince out of the palace?" Xiejin greeted the gentleman with a calm attitude. "I have something to do, gentlemen, please go slowly." After saying that, he took Hao and left. This. All the adults looked at each other. Xie Xiaofu muttered, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince was raised by the eldest princess. The eldest princess loved him very much. It's so late. Xie Jin must have just brought the prince back from the eldest princess's mansion. Your Excellencies, after hearing this explanation, seem to think it is reasonable. That should be true, other adults said, but the prince is still young after all, and it is not safe to leave the palace frequently. If Her Royal Highness the princess misses the little prince, she can actually go into the palace to take care of him. Yes, there are many dangers outside the palace. If someone catches your eye, the consequences will be disastrous. The prince is the crown prince of Dongling. He has a distinguished status and must not take risks. Xie Xiaofu said calmly, I think the same way. I will talk to the regent if I have the opportunity in the future. It would be better for the young prince to leave the palace less often. All the adults nodded, turned around and walked out of the palace gate. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 792. It was already Haishi when we returned to Dajhan Palace, and the palace was brightly lit. Rong Yu is reviewing the papers. Xie Jin took Hao in, greeted him as usual, and gave a brief account of the prince's itinerary tonight. Nan 11 sat in front of the royal cabinet and read the memorial with Rong Yu. She put down the memorial, got up and walked over to hug Hao. Thank you for your hard work. Is it fun outside? It's fun. Hao pursed his lips and raised a shallow smile. Can Hao go out more often in the future? Nan 11 kissed his face, of course. Hao turned around and looked, where is my brother? Brother is asleep. Nan 11 put down Hao. Hao wants to take a look. Hao slowly shook his head and walked up to the royal case. Father. Rong Yu looked up at him, huh? Hao wants a reading companion. Hao lowered his head and lowered his voice, not sure if it was because of nervousness, a child from the Sen family. The Sen family? Rong Yu looked at Xie Jin. The crown prince went to the Sen family and saw the youngest child of the Sen family being made to kneel in the courtyard. He felt pitiful for him and wanted to take him to his side. Xie Jin replied, the concubines of the Sen family are all very powerful. And, the youngest son is indeed not having a good life. Sen Xing is careless, and his second wife is also uninformed. He is too young to protect his son. All in all, the house is a mess. Rong Yu was silent for a moment. Why did you take him to Sen's house? I mentioned to the Lord this afternoon that several old cases have been unearthed recently, one of which is the Sen family. Xie Jin said, the Sen family's cases back then were convicted by the imperial court, and I have no right to reiterate them, so I would like to ask the Lord for instructions. Meaning? Rong Yu put down his ink pen and took a sip from the teacup. There is no need to reiterate the Sen family case. No matter what happened back then, it has passed. Xie Jin should be. But since the prince wants that child, let him enter the palace. Rong Yu said calmly, after the palace examination, we will select a few companions for the prince, and any suitable ones can be sent to the palace. Xie Jin responded respectfully, if there is nothing else to do, I will leave first. Rong Yu hummed, go back and rest early, so you don't have to work too late. Yes. After Xie Jin left, Nan 11 asked someone to take Hao to wash up and go to bed. She turned around and sat on the brocade couch, sighing in her voice, what a pity for the Sen family. When Empress Jinghua was on the throne, the Sen family was one of the few families that did not participate in the imperial husband's incident. Although their status and influence were not as good as other families at that time, with the death of Empress Jinghua and the young emperor's accession to the throne, the Sen family after the Sen family was reused by the regent, their status became more and more stable. The young emperor was able to secure the throne, and Dongling was able to fend off foreign enemies, and the Sen family was indispensable. It was only later that the throne was passed down from generation to generation, and the descendants of the Sen family received more and more respect and honor, and their influence in the court became more and more important. Finally, they had both political and military power, and gradually became arrogant, which aroused the emperor's dissatisfaction. It is a fact that the master has great achievements, and it is also a fact that he is disobedient. The Sen family is not unjust. Wrong you hugged her waist, but the biggest responsibility for this matter still lies with the royal family. No matter how much the king trusts and favors his ministers, he will not be wronged. There should be a certain degree of restraint, and you should not praise it too highly, otherwise you will have murderous intentions sooner or later. Nan 11 raised her eyebrows. I see that you seem to have too much regard for Xiejin and Xianyuan Yao. Are you not afraid of harming them in the end? Am I still here? Wrong you smiled lightly. How much trust and respect I give them is all because I am sure they won't be able to find someone in my hand. 11 should understand the difference between pampering and admiration. Nan 11 nodded. So this is why you want to cultivate power for how early? There is an emperor and a minister. Wrong you said, many important positions in the court need to be filled by experienced ministers, but the king's favorite ministers must be under his control and have more or less similar temperaments. Veteran ministers in the center, one just has to do his or her best, while as a favored minister, one needs to be calm about honor and disgrace, have a certain amount of progress and retreat, behave in a manner consistent with the king's wishes, and must always be loyal. Lord and minister. The king takes the initiative, and the ministers are loyal and humble. This is the most suitable way of getting along between the king and his ministers. If the king is not jealous and the ministers do not violate the rules, then there will be no suspicion of the master due to his high achievements. Only when the court is stable and the monarch and his ministers are harmonious can they focus on resisting foreign enemies. When the monarch is jealous and his ministers are disrespectful, it will lead to internal strife in the family. If internal and external troubles occur at the same time, how can the family and country be strong? How can the country be stable? Nan 11 smiled and said, the regent is better than his master. He really knows the way of an emperor. Wrong you said, thank you 11 You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 793. Because of the military expedition, the palace examination that was supposed to be held in July was delayed for a month. On August 5, the candidates took a re-examination in Baohe Hall, and the real palace examination did not begin until August 6. Seats were set up in the hall, the 4 treasures of the study were placed on the table, and the rice paper was spread out. After the students were examined, they sat down one by one. The first exam was the 4 books and 5 classics, which were not difficult for the candidates present. The 4 books and 5 classics were the must-read papers for students. As long as they studied hard on weekdays, they would have a high chance of passing. The eunuch received the order and shouted, "The exam begins." The candidates grinded their pens, picked up their pens and dipped them in ink, and began to write furiously. The ministers stood quietly on both sides and watched the students answer. With so many eyes watching, it would be surprising if someone could cheat. The first exam went smoothly and quietly, and nothing happened. When an hour came, the candidates stopped writing together, and the officials in charge of collecting the papers came to collect the papers. The eunuch announced a quarter-hour break, and the candidates could go to the toilet on their own. The regent was efficient in his work, because the palace examination was the last stage of the imperial examination, and most of the candidates had been eliminated, so the test papers did not need to be closed. The regent appointed several officials on the spot to review the papers in the side hall, and Chu Hongii and Siejin led several people to patrol and supervise in the side hall to prevent all forms of cheating. The second exam was to write an article, and the regent personally set the questions. Writing the article was improvisation, and no one knew what the regent would ask beforehand, not even the ministers. After the students finished writing the articles, the papers were also collected by a special person, and the regent reviewed them, and then several old cabinet ministers took turns to read them, and it was clear at a glance who wrote the best article. Of course, if the regent wanted to test something else, he would also give the students a few couplets on the spot, or give the students a topic for improvisation. The topic could be about love, flowers, snow and moon, or about the great events of the country, or the echo of the seasons, or the way of the monarch and his ministers. In addition to writing good essays, students also need to have flexible minds. They read a lot and have a wide range of knowledge. Naturally, they will not be too nervous in such occasions. They will respond calmly and show their talents. This batch of students are all well educated. Wrong. You turn to look at the ministers. What do you think? The ministers nodded one after another. Everyone is strong, especially the top three. It is really hard to tell who is better. From the comprehensive results of the previous day's re-examination and the previous autumn and spring examinations, the top three have been determined after the regent and the adults discussed, namely Chu Xuanyi of the Chu family, Mu Jinglin, a poor boy, and Mo Suanwu, the son of the Mo family. No one expected that the son of the Mo family would choose to give up martial arts and take the imperial examination, and what was even more unexpected was that he would enter the top three in one fell swoop, which was really beyond everyone's expectations. It seems that this son of the Mo family, who does not show his strength, is not to be underestimated. However, compared with Mu Jinglin's caution and Chu Xuanyi's modesty, Mo Suanwu's article has a hidden edge. I wonder if it will displease the regent. The ministers have their own thoughts. Rong Yu sat on the wide royal chair and said indifferently, "Pass the papers of the three of them to other students to have a look." Yes. No one spoke in front of the hall. Rong Yu lowered his eyes and drank a sip of tea. He picked up the pen and ticked the names of the candidates on the papers he liked. The circled papers were placed on the left, and the uncircled papers were placed on the right. He marked the papers very quickly, almost reading 10 lines at a glance. Whether the candidates' articles would satisfy him or not could be seen from the style of the articles. When he finished marking all the papers, the candidates present had almost passed all 3 papers around. Chu Xuanyi read Mo Suanwu and Mu Jinglin's papers, Mu Jinglin read Chu Xuanyi and Mo Suanwu's papers, and Mo Suanwu also read their papers. So he had a general understanding of his own and his opponent's knowledge. Chu Xuanyi originally thought that he could definitely take the first place and be named the champion, but after reading it, he was not sure anymore. The uncertainty was not because of knowledge, but courage. In fact, he, Mo Suanwu and Mu Jinglin should be equally talented in writing. The biggest difference between the three lies in their temperaments. Mu Jinglin was born in a poor family and came to Beijing for the palace examination for the first time. It was rare for him to see the king. Not only was he cautious and humble in etiquette, but he was also very careful in choosing words in his article. He did not dare to be disrespectful in the whole article. Chu Xuanyi's writing style tends to be humble and gentle, not showing his edge, mainly because he had suffered a loss from the regent before, and now he has learned his lesson and learned to keep his head down and obey his orders. But he never expected that Mo Suanwu, the legitimate son of the Mo family who had been silent for 4 years since the queen ascended the throne, would pass the palace examination with him, and surpass him in the edge of his article. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 794. For Mo Suanwu, giving up military service and pursuing literature was a decision he hesitated for a long time. After 4 years of silence and neglect, the Mo family seemed to have suddenly lost its presence. Except for Lord Mo, who was still serving as an official in the court, there was almost no splash at other times. Of course, the power of the Mo family still existed, and neglect did not mean suppression. But no one could figure out the thoughts of the regent and Her Majesty the Queen. Everyone saw that the regent valued Xian Yuanyao and Chu Hongii. Among the young generation of military generals, no one could be compared with these two. Before the war started in full swing, these two were enough to take charge of the military power. If one day in the future, the world really began to be turbulent, and Xian Yuanyao and Chu Hongii were not enough to resist foreign enemies, then it would be highly likely that the regent would personally put on armor and go into battle, rather than choosing Mo Suanwu, who was not as good as Chu Hongii. Whether it was a civil official or a military general, those who could be valued by the regent were definitely the best, and there was no such thing as making up the numbers, so they had to change their ways and find another way out. Rong Yu had previously chatted with Nan 11 about Mo Suanwu. Mo Suanwu's martial arts and military tactics are pretty good among military generals, but if a military general's mind is not broad enough, he will not be able to command thousands of soldiers. To be in charge of military power is not only about being strong in one's own ability, but also about being tolerant and broad-minded, and being able to listen to others' opinions, so that the king is qualified to let the king hand over the lives of soldiers to him. However, it is not a big deal that Mo Suanwu is slightly inferior to Chu Hongii in the struggle for military power. A man's mind is not as broad as a woman's, which is the reason why the regent has never used him. However, since Mo Suanwu chose to give up martial arts and pursue literature, the rules of the imperial examination are the same for everyone, without prejudice. As for whether he gets the top or the third place, it is actually not important. The imperial examination is just a door to enter the official career. Whether you can be reused after entering this door depends on your comprehensive ability, style of doing things, and your loyalty to the king and the people. The palace examination lasted a whole day. After the first and second rounds in the morning, there was another policy essay in the afternoon. The policy essay was more serious and cautious than the 2 rounds in the morning. If the first 2 rounds tested complete knowledge, then the policy essay tested the understanding of the court, the view of the world, and the suggestions made to the king. For the candidates, this is the test to show their knowledge, pattern, vision, and courage. After the 3rd round of examination, the palace examination for the day was over. The Ministry of Rights was responsible for arranging the rest and maintaining order for the candidates. The candidates could go out of the palace to relax, visit brothels or go to the market, which was not restricted. Even the Ministry of Revenue allocated some silver to subsidize the children of poor families. The palace examination was delayed, and the food and accommodation expenses required by the candidates during the waiting period were all subsidized by the court. On the 7th day of August, there was a day of rest. The regent summoned all the cabinet ministers and several examiners to exchange the examination papers in the Kinzen Palace. On the morning of the 8th day of the 8th month, the regent summoned all the candidates to the imperial court and announced the names of the top 3 candidates in the first class. The top candidate was Mu Jinglin, the second candidate was Chu Xuanyi, and the third candidate was Mo Suanwu. This result was beyond many people's expectations, but it seemed reasonable. Only Mo Suanwu's expression darkened slightly when he heard the news, and then he accepted the fact expressionlessly. A loud announcement sounded in the inner room. 3 people in the first class were awarded the title of Jinchi, and the top candidate Mu Jinglin entered the Hanlin Academy as a compiler. The second candidate Chu Xuanyi and the third candidate Mo Suanwu were appointed as editors of the Hanlin Academy. 6 people in the second class were awarded the title of Jinchi. Han Chiu was appointed as the secretary of the Ministry of War, and Pei Xian was appointed as the director of the Ministry of Works. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 795. After the appointments of the first dash, second dash, and third grade candidates were announced, the regent announced that a banquet would be given to Guanyang Hall in 3 days. All the students thanked the emperor for his kindness. The prince regent announces the first prize, the second prize, and 10 hua to come to the audience. The 3 of them entered the hall one by one to pay homage. In addition to the regent who was sitting in front of the imperial court, there were also Xie Fu and several cabinet ministers in the palace. Prime Minister Liu was sorting out the students' papers and filing them into the records. You all are very knowledgeable, and your articles are equally impressive. It's amazing and admirable. The one who spoke was Xie Xiaofu, with a calm tone and a faint smile. But the regent said that you may be a little unconvinced by this result. So I call you here and listen to your thoughts. As soon as these words came out, the air in Qinzhen Palace slightly condensed. Not satisfied with the palace examination results. Does this mean that the regent is partial? I am not dissatisfied. Chu Xuanyi bowed slightly, his voice was humble and restrained, although I was originally confident that I could get the number 1 scholar. After reading Swexy Mu's article in the morning, I admire him extremely. Whoever among the 3 of me won the number 1 scholar within reason. Mo Suanwu said nothing. They had passed the articles on the second test paper to each other in the morning. There was really no clear distinction between the writing skills. They had all worked hard. Even the handwriting was in standard formal style. No one was deliberately showing off, let alone suspicion of laziness. But he was really dissatisfied. Since your majesty came to the throne, capable ministers have emerged in Dongling in large numbers. Among the younger generation, there is Chu Hong'ai from the Chu family, and Xie Jin from the Xie family. They have all gained important positions in front of this King Rong. Yu put down the ink pen in his hand and raised his eyes. He said to the 3 people in front of him, the Su family is no longer here. There is no need to mention it again. There is only one Mo family who is quiet and has not been activated yet. I think Mr. Mo has accumulated too much dissatisfaction in his heart. Mo Suanwu's expression suddenly changed, he clenched his hands tightly, and then knelt down. I don't dare. Don't you dare? You know in your heart that I have no intention of arguing with you. Wrong, you said in an indifferent voice. Your article is indeed beautifully written, which is beyond my expectation. However, the words used in the policy argument are sharp, and there is a hint of arrogance and injustice. The words written in the article represent your inner thoughts. Mr. Mo dares to say that he has no resentment. Mo Suanwu pursed his lips. I understand my guilt. Since I have chosen you to be the 3rd flower, I have no intention of punishing you. Wrong, you picked up his paper and glanced at it casually. If I guessed correctly, you probably want to use this article to test my heart and see if I will be angered by you. Mo Suanwu's heart sank, and he slowly clenched his hands. I don't mean this. You think you can get the top prize. If you can't, it's because I am deliberately suppressing you and don't want you to get the first place. Wrong, you raised his eyes, with an expression that could not tell whether he was happy or angry. Have I wronged you? Mo Suanwu subconsciously wanted to say that he didn't dare, but the cold air that ran up his back from the soles of his feet made him mute. After a long silence, he lowered his head and said, I acknowledge my guilt. Wrong, you took out Mu Jinglin's paper and handed it to the chamberlain. Show him this policy. The chamberlain lowered his head and walked over and handed the paper to Mo Suanwu. You might as well read Mu Jinglin's policy. Wrong, you picked up the teacup and said, after reading it, tell me whether you accept it or not. Mo Suanwu silently took the paper, his eyes fell on the beautiful font, his lips pursed slightly, and then he read the article carefully. The whole policy review was about 2,000 words, and it didn't take long to read it at his speed. There was silence in the Qinzhen Palace. Xie Xiaofu and several cabinet ministers didn't speak, but they were each surprised in their hearts. Did the regent really have a pair of fiery eyes? They have also read Mo Suanwu's papers. His words are sharp, and his suggestions for governing the country are indeed good. However, there is a hint of injustice in his words, but it is also true. It's just that what they thought was that Mo Suanwu had such a temperament, and he had been silent for 4 years, which made them feel a little uncomfortable. It might be a last resort decision to abandon martial arts and follow literature, but no one thought that he would dare to use articles to test the regent's attitude and mind. However, the regent was able to determine his inner thoughts just by looking at his papers. It really made people wonder if he had any special powers that could see through people's inner thoughts. Time passed little by little. Mo Suanwu's palms gradually became sweaty, and an emotion called shame fermented from the bottom of his heart. Mu Jinglin's strategy was no worse than him, at least it was much better than he expected. Mu Jinglin came from a poor family. In Mo Suanwu's view, even if a student from a poor family studied hard for 10 years, at most he would have better knowledge and better written articles, and he would be very knowledgeable about the governance of the country, the way of monarchs and ministers, the situation of the world, and the livelihood of the people. He doesn't know much, because he doesn't have enough conditions to understand many things, and the things and patterns in his mind should be limited. So after the 3 of them tied in the morning, he took it for granted that in the afternoon's decision-making, the number 1 winner should be Chu Xuanyi, even if it wasn't him. At least it won't be Mu Jinglin. But the result was unexpected. The number 1 winner was Mu Jinglin, and Mo Suanwu won the last place among the top 3 in the first class. This result was not what he wanted. He naturally thought that the regent did not like his article and was angry with his article. There was a faint sense of injustice among the people, so they were deliberately suppressed. But after reading Mu Jinglin's paper, he realized that he had too little knowledge and was too self-righteous. $window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 796. The Kinzen hall was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. There was sweat on Mo Suanwu's forehead. At this moment, he suddenly felt that he was particularly childish, like a mouse that thought he was smart but was being played by a cat. 4 years of silence could not smooth out his edges or suppress his emotions. His temper was so bad that he now felt ashamed of himself. Suezimu's article is very well written. He didn't know if his voice betrayed any strange emotions, but he should indeed feel blushing at this time. I am ashamed of myself and feel inferior. Rongyu didn't have any special reaction when he heard this, and just said lightly, learning is just a way to become an official. It makes no difference to me whether I am the number 1 scholar, the second best scholar, or the third best scholar. The glory of the scientific examination is only for this time. What I care about is your performance after becoming an official. He raised his eyes slightly, and the pressure in his eyes immediately appeared. If you want to be reused by this king, in addition to outstanding ability, the most important thing is loyalty. I like obedient people. Don't show off your little cleverness to me in the future, otherwise you will only make yourself asking for hardship. I don't know who the last sentence refers to specifically, but it has a strong connotation of beating. Chu Xuanyi lowered his head in response and automatically took this warning into his own mind. Thinking of his courage to negotiate with Rongyu, he couldn't help but admire his courage at that time. He spent countless nights thinking about how he had negotiated with Rongyu. Why didn't you think that you were actually negotiating with someone who could decide your own destiny? Mo Suanwu, like him, also believed that the regent was actually warning him. After all, in the eyes of the regent, his thoughts could only be regarded as cleverness. As for Mu Jinglin, he didn't think about anything. He just listened respectfully to the regent's lectures, remembered every word of what the regent said in his heart, and then told himself with fear that everything in the past had returned to zero. After becoming an official, it is the true starting point of life. Rong Yu didn't say too much. He was not a talkative person. Those who were willing to knock meant that they were willing to give them more opportunities. Otherwise, they would not say a word. As for how much they could listen to, they would be able to do more in the future. To what extent, that is their own business. As the regent of Dongling, his principle will not change from beginning to end, reusing capable and loyal people. Outstanding ability and loyalty. Both are indispensable. You can go back after you receive the job. Rong Yu said, the exam is hard, so go back and have a good rest. The three of them resigned respectfully. Xie Xiaofu looked at the backs of the three young people, pondered for a moment, then turned to look at Rong Yu. The regent has changed a lot in the past 2 years. Rong Yu glanced at him. I still clearly remember the scientific examination 3 years ago. Xie Xiaofu smiled lightly. It was Xiejin, Xianyuan Hua and Xianyuan Chen. The regent's beating on them has never been so obvious. At that time, the top 3 of the 3 were directly appointed to positions without any warning. I don't know if it was because I was too lazy to say it or because this group of students was more recalcitrant. But having said that, when it comes to being difficult to tame, Xiejin's temperament is probably not as difficult as that of Chu Xuanyi and Mo Suanwu combined. On the contrary, Xianyuan Hua of Prince Jing's palace and Xianyuan Chen of Prince Wei's palace are more obedient and do not need to be tamed. Worrying too much. Rong Yu naturally understood what he meant, but some things didn't need explanation. Naturally, he has changed, but he basically treats his ministers equally, but treats them in different ways according to different temperaments. There is almost no fraud in the imperial examination this year. The students who can pass the imperial examination have real talents and can stand the test. Prime Minister Lu sorted out all the candidates' papers, and his voice became more relaxed. With the regent's iron fist, the atmosphere in the court is indeed much better than before. There are fewer corrupt officials and less malpractice for personal gain. The court can select more real talents, which is a blessing for the people of Dongling. Several other cabinet ministers nodded one after another and sang their praises. Having Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent in Tangling is really a blessing to the people. It is not only a blessing for the people, but also a blessing for the talented people in the world. The High Priest is indeed the God-server who protects Dongling. What he has done for Dongling could not be more sage. As Rong Yu listened to what these normally dignified veterans said to each other, he began to praise him, and twitched his lips slightly. If you really respect me so much, why don't you go back and write a memorial praising his virtues? The word count doesn't need to be too many, just compare with the word count and level of today's policy papers. As soon as these words came out, the hall instantly became quiet. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 797. Comparative Strategy. After so many years in officialdom, which one of them is not an old man with one foot in the coffin now? In addition to often writing memorials, they have not written articles of 2,000 words for a long time. Now asking them to write an article praising their virtues will probably take a lot of thinking. Students are going to serve in various ministries, and many things need to be supervised by me. Prime Minister Lu was the first to speak. I will retire first. As soon as the others heard that he was resigning, they naturally couldn't wait to leave and started to leave one after another. After a while, Rong Yu was the only one left in the Kinzen Palace. Of course, there were also the eunuchs responsible for grinding, the eunuchs serving tea, and the palace servants standing silently on both sides. Urgency finally calmed down, and Rongyu finished all the matters that needed to be dealt with by himself, and quickly returned to the Dajhan palace. Nan 11 took Zhaner and Rongchen to play in the palace courtyard. The evening sun shone brightly in the courtyard. Yunyu and Qingyang teased Zhaner and their son with toys on the left and right. It had been 16 months. The child walks more steadily than he did a few months ago, and his reactions are much more flexible. Rongchen, who has just turned 1 year old, is still a little clumsy. His small body is unsteady when he walks, as if he is about to fall at any time. Rongyu stood in front of the palace gate and looked for a moment, his face softened and the corners of his mouth raised slightly. Someone from the palace noticed him first and quickly saluted and said hello. Nan 11 heard the voice and turned around with a gentle smile. Are you done? When Zhaner saw his father coming back, he ran over on his short legs and reached out for him to hug him. We're done. Rongyu walked over, answered Nan 11's words, bent down and picked up Zhaner. Have you been naughty today? The little child nestled in his father's arms. He leaned over and kissed Rongyu on the face. He called out father softly, leaving a circle of saliva marks on his noble and indifferent face. Zhaner is more courageous than his brother. Nan 11 sighed, Hauer is more reserved after all. His Royal Highness is stable and has the majesty of an emperor, Yunyu said, picking up his son and putting it into Qinjiang's hands. The second prince has a lively personality and is better at expressing emotions. Nan 11 smiled and said, you have finished speaking. Yunyu smiled respectfully and said, I tell you the truth, I don't dare to fool your majesty. Yunyu is right. Qingyang unconditionally agreed with his wife's statement. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and His Highness the Second Highness have completely different temperaments. Rongyu glanced at him. Come here and give me a hug. Yunyu reached out to take Zhaner, then turned around and took the two children to the side hall to play. Rongyu took Nan 11's hand and walked into the hall. I have heard the results of the palace examination. Nan 11's voice was calm. Mo Suanwu gave up martial arts and became a scholar, but he still managed to get into the top 3 of the first class. It's unexpected. Rongyu held her body and sat down on the brocade couch, and said in a calm voice, I still don't know how to suppress my temper. If you don't change your temper after today, you will suffer a loss sooner or later. Let's take it one step at a time. Nan 11 said, Mo Suanwu is talented. People with ability will inevitably be arrogant. Besides, after being left out for 4 years, it is inevitable that he will feel depressed. It is not uncommon for the children of aristocratic families to be both civilized and martial, but it is not uncommon for them to abandon martial arts and become civilized and still get into the top 3 of the first class. Rongyu nodded. Everything that needs to be mentioned today has been mentioned, and what needs to be hammered has been hammered. What his fate will be in the future depends on his own understanding. If today's scheming can scare him and make him understand his identity and the family responsibilities that his identity bears, and what he says and does in the future will be worthy of his knowledge and pride today, and learn to be humble and self-reflective, he will not treat him badly. The Mo family. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 798. The palace examination is over, and the busyness in the court has come to an end for the time being. On August 11, Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent held a banquet in Guangyang Hall to entertain the students, and the monarch and his ministers enjoyed themselves. On August 12, the Queen decreed that the youngest son of the Sen family, Sen En, would come to the palace to be the prince's companion. In addition to the young prince and Xianyu Enjan, there was another student in the study room. In the blink of an eye, more than a month passed. In late September, the first good news came from the front line. The leader of the Obsidian Army, Xianyu Enyao, led his cavalry to break through the border of South Vietnam, captured the first city in South Vietnam, and occupied Chuashan City in South Vietnam. The commander of Chuashan City was killed by an arrow in the air, the city gate was lost, and the defenders in the city who lost their commander fled upon hearing the news, capture the thief first and capture the king first. This was the first of Xian Yuanyao's 36 strategies of war. But what he used was not to capture, but to kill. The first battle was successful, and it took less than 2 months from the time the troops were ordered to capture the first city. The good news was brought back by Chu Nanyi. The first batch of grain and grass he escorted was sent directly to Chuashan City. Prince Yao won the first battle and set up camp in Chuashan. He planned to rest for a few days before fighting again. When Rong Yu heard Chu Nanyi's report, he didn't say much. The commander made his own decision on matters on the battlefield. The general would not accept the emperor's order. Xian Yuanyao took the order to go to the battle. Rong Yu, who was in the palace, would not interfere. Whatever he decides. Xian Yuanyao has been with him for several years and knows his bottom line of principles, what should be done and what should not be done, he knows better than anyone else. After reporting the matters at hand, Chu Nanyi hurried back home. He had been away for a month, and Qingling and her daughter were taken care of by her mother. Although she was relieved, she really missed her very much. The second batch of grain and grass had been prepared in Zidu. Xiejin and his people arrived in Zidu. After inventory and inspection, they escorted the grain and grass to set off in late September. They rushed to the battlefield in a mighty manner, but encountered an accident on the way. "Sir," the spy from the front rode back and reported, 5 miles ahead we enter the mountain road and canyon. There are dense forests on the higher ground on both sides. There is an ambush in the forest." Xiejin held the reins and raised his hand to signal the convoy to stop. "How many people are in ambush?" 200 people. Xiejin's eyebrows were slightly cold. "How about force?" "Their weapons include bows and arrows, scimitars and spears," the spy replied. "They are strong and strong. They don't look like ordinary bandits. They must have been trained. It means that the fighting ability is not weak." Xiejin was silent for a moment. "Ninjian, how many kills can you kill in a 5-mile journey?" Mingyan obviously understood what Xiejin meant and whispered, 60 people won't be a problem. If they take a flat road, it will take about 3/4 of an hour for the grain and grass convoy to normally travel 5 miles. If they deliberately slow down at this time, they will be noticed by the people ambush in front, so they need to drive normally and eliminate all the enemies within these 3/4 of an hour. Only those who ambush can ensure that the convoy is not plotted when it enters the canyon. The terrain of the canyon is low. Once the convoy is trapped in it and is attacked by arrows, unnecessary casualties will definitely increase, and the difficulty of counterattack will also increase dramatically. Therefore, the safest method at the moment is to eliminate them as quickly as possible, and this needs to be done quietly to avoid head-on combat. Xiejin looked at the mountain road ahead in silence. He raised his hand to untie his robe and took it off neatly. Under the robe was a light and tight black outfit. He took out the dagger in his boots, turned over and dismounted, and turned his head. Said, "Fang Bin, you lead the team forward on horseback. Don't stop. Just drive normally." Fang Bin was slightly shocked. "Sir, you. No need to ask any more questions, just do as you are told." After Xiejin ordered this, he turned around and rushed away. "Ming Yan, Ming Mei, you two follow me." 2 figures in black followed behind him like lightning. Fang Bin rode his horse to the front of the team, while Xiejin's horse sat at the back and followed the team slowly. "In the canyon ahead, everyone be on guard." "Yes. The mountain road is rugged, and the dense forest is the best place to hide and ambush." Tall and muscular people in black lie quietly in the grass, holding bows and arrows, with sinister and sharp eyes, like wolves in the dense forest, waiting quietly. Appearance of prey. The weather is sunny today, cloudless, and even the wind seems to have stopped. "Chief, We still have 5 miles to go. The spy quickly passed by under the cover of the bushes and reported quickly, with a hint of hesitation in his voice, but something is wrong. What's wrong? Didn't Dongling send 60,000 troops? The spy lay down and his rough voice sounded harsh. I just took a look and found that the team escorting the grain and grass was not long and there was not much grain and grass. Did we get the wrong news? The leader frowned. Let's explore again. Yes. The spy stood up and left again. Just after taking a few steps, he suddenly felt a stinging pain on his neck. He ignored it, thinking it was an insect in the dense forest. He reached out and wiped it casually, and ran quickly to a place with few people. Go, but the next moment, his steps suddenly froze. The sudden feeling of suffocation and the bright red blood on his palms made his face freeze a little bit. He slowly lowered his head and looked at his palm. Before he could figure out where the blood came from, his vision suddenly went dark and he fell over on his back. A red blood mark as thin as a hair was left on his neck. Xiejin walked past him silently. The prey is about to appear. I seem to hear the sound of the wheels. The man lying on the mountainside deliberately lowered his voice, revealing a bit of bloodthirsty and cruelty. Spicy. There was a pop. An extremely subtle sound penetrated the eardrum, accompanied by a faint smell of blood. The man shuddered, keenly sensing a hint of ominous aura, and subconsciously turned his head to look. What came into view was his companion's head tilted to the side, his eyes wide open, and a thin blood stain on his neck was oozing blood beads. The man's pupils shrank suddenly, and just as he was about to react, he suddenly felt a pain in his neck, and the whole person lost all the ability to react. The emotions in his pupils froze, and his expression on his face was stiff. Bang! The man tilted his head and fell weakly in the grass. Xiejin took the dagger and slowly wiped the man's clothes, wiping off the few blood stains. He smiled softly. This is the first time I've been treated as prey in my life. It feels quite fresh. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 799. No one could respond to his words. Mingyan and Mingmei rushed from two directions. They had obviously completed their respective tasks. Xiejin raised his eyelids and looked down at the convoy slowly entering the canyon. The leader, Fang Bin, clenched the weapon in his hand as he walked. The soldiers on both sides of the grain and fodder convoy all looked alert and prepared for the battle. Xiejin raised his eyebrows slightly, stepped hard on a stone with his toes, and his body fell gracefully. Be on guard, Fang Bin urgently ordered, fight. However, when everyone looked up, they saw their own master falling from the sky, and in an instant, his slender figure sat neatly on his horse. Everyone's hearts relaxed, and all guarded faces faded. Mingyan and Mingmei each returned to their horses, fell behind the team, and remained silent. Sir Fang Bin turned his horse's head and walked to Xiejin's side. How is the situation? Xiejin said calmly, it's solved. Fang Bin frowned, I don't know who it is. Looting of grain and grass happens from time to time during wartime. It's normal, Xiejin said indifferently, not thinking that this was something worth making a fuss about. Now that Dongling is at war with South Vietnam, we can now get our way to transport grain and grass and try to get there halfway. The robbers were either South Vietnamese soldiers in disguise or hired killers. In any case, the mastermind behind it must be South Vietnam. Fang Bin nodded, what you said is absolutely true. Cheer up, everyone, Xiejin ordered, continue on your way. Yes. Transporting food and fodder was more important than anything else, and there was no room for mistakes or delays. Siejin had no time to interrogate the identities of the ambushing people, so he killed them all and rushed to Shuashan city without stopping. The team escorting the grain and fodder was huge, and they walked on the road for a full 20 days. When they arrived at the capital of King Yu, they were warmly received. "Thank you for your hard work all the way, Sir." King Yu personally led people out of the city to greet him. "General Xian Yuan has just captured Shuashan city and is currently setting up camp. Why don't Sir Xia and the other officers stay in Yu country to rest for 2 days, and then send someone to inquire about Sir information?" Siejin did not agree immediately, but said calmly, "What are the trends in South Vietnam? King Yu and his son have been back to Yu country for 2 months, always paying attention to the battle situation on the front line, sandwiched between two powerful countries. No matter who loses or wins, the outcome of Yu country has been roughly decided. However, if South Vietnam wins, it will definitely retaliate against Yu Guo's act of illegally lending the road to Dongling. Therefore, both emotionally and logically, Yu Guo naturally hopes that Dongling will win. There is no obvious movement yet," King Yu said. "The general of Shuashan city was shot in the center by an arrow and fell from the tower to his death. The generals in the city were leaderless and the morale of the army was in chaos. General Xian Yuan took advantage of the situation to attack and half of the generals in the city were killed. Half of them fled, and now they have arrived at Quang city to meet up." Siejin's eyebrows moved slightly, and his eyes fell on King Yu. "Didn't South Vietnam send anyone to negotiate terms with the king?" King Yu's face changed slightly and he did not dare to hide it. "I did send someone here at first. They want you to burn my food and grass." Siejin stated South Vietnam's purpose in one sentence. King Yu's expression changed again, and then he smiled calmly and said, "Even if they have this plan, I won't go as they wish." "Don't worry, sir." Siejin smiled faintly, "Your Majesty, don't be nervous. I know you will definitely not agree to such conditions." King Yu breathed a sigh of relief and nodded repeatedly. "Gu will never agree. The army has been traveling for many days, and it is indeed a bit hard." Siejin said calmly, "In the next 2 days, we will harass the king." King Yu nodded repeatedly, "It should be. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered." Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 800. King Yu and his son returned with Xian Yuanyao's army at the end of July. Before the Dongling Iron Cavalry arrived at the border, even if Nanyu sent envoys, they would not be able to see King Yu. When they could see him, it would be after the fall of Shuashan. However, the Yu kingdom was weak in military strength, and Nanyu could not be so foolish as to think that King Yu had the ability to help them recapture Shuashan, so they would not make such a request. However, the Dongling grain and grass would definitely pass through the Yu kingdom. Grain and grass were the lives of soldiers. Once the grain and grass were destroyed, the soldiers and horses would starve. Just think about it and you know what the consequences would be. Siejin expected that Nanyu would definitely send envoys to talk to King Yu. Since someone set up a checkpoint on the way to rob the grain and grass, they would definitely think about what to do if they failed. The imperial capital of the Yu kingdom was their second checkpoint. If the grain and grass were burned here, then Dongling and Yu kingdom would definitely turn against each other, and the Dongling Iron Cavalry would be even worse without grain and grass. As for the means of negotiating conditions, it was nothing more than coercion and inducement. But firstly, King Yu really didn't have the courage to go against Dongling, and secondly, his master was wise and ordered the grain and grass to be escorted in batches, which could not only speed up the journey but also disperse the risks. Even if there was a chance, the soldiers would not be left without food. Although this would require more people to escort the grain and grass, Dongling had many capable people, so it was not difficult to arrange for grain collection or select suitable elite soldiers for escort. Siejin ordered people to put the grain and grass in place and went into the city with King Yu. King Yu held a banquet in the palace to entertain Siejin. accompanied by two princes. The eldest prince Jean Rouault had gone somewhere, and he arrived late after half of the banquet. He was dressed in white clothes that were whiter than snow, and his whole body was clean and holy, like a cultivator who lived in seclusion, and more like a high mountain flower picked by Nanyi on the top of the mountain, provided that he didn't speak. There is something I am particularly curious about. Jean Rouault sat down on his seat, his snow-white robe exuding a pure luster. If Prince Yao has a rebellious heart or colluded with the enemy and betrayed the country, will Master Xie stick to his loyalty for the sake of justice, or will he help him rebel? So it is better for such a person not to speak. Once he speaks, his holy and clean temperament will be destroyed in an instant, making people want to sew up his troublesome mouth. Prince Yu's face changed. Rouault, don't talk nonsense in front of Master Xie. The second prince frowned and said dissatisfiedly, why is the eldest prince so outspoken? Prince Yao is born in the royal family, with the noble blood of the royal family flowing in his body. He is loyal to Her Majesty the Queen. How could he have a rebellious heart? Yes, please think twice before speaking, eldest prince. The third prince sneered and said, when the two countries are at war, such words are most likely to disturb the morale of the army. If Master Xie takes your eldest prince's words seriously, I am afraid the consequences will be disastrous. Jean Rouault poured himself a cup of tea, took a sip, and said in a light voice with a bit of mockery, I can say whatever I want to say. Do I need your consent? The second and third princes' faces suddenly changed, staring at him in anger. What does Prince Jean Rouault mean by this? Xie Jin smiled faintly. Xie would like to hear the details. This prince just received news that the Emperor of Nanyu sent his most trusted confidant to Shuashan City, and it is said that he is going to negotiate with Prince Yao. Jean Rouault said in a light tone, Shuashan City is now ruled by Prince Yao. Without his permission, the envoys of Nanyu should not be able to enter the city. Rouault King Yu was shocked, are you serious? Don't talk nonsense in front of Master Xie. Jean Rouault said indifferently, of course it's true. When have I ever lied? Xie Jin silently picked up the teacup, and there was no special expression on his handsome face, but he did believe what Jean Rouault said a little, not for anything else, just because this person has the ability to predict the future. So it is normal that his spies have not received the news yet. Jean Rouault's news should not be heard from others, but calculated by himself. The confidant of the Emperor of Nanyu, he looked up at Jean Rouault and smiled faintly, I wonder what position he holds in Nanyu? After Prime Minister Su was killed, is there anyone to replace the new Prime Minister? This man is not a high-ranking minister, but a family slave of the Emperor of Nanyu before he ascended the throne. He is both civil and military, and has a deep mind. He specializes in handling some shameful things for the Emperor. Jean Rouault sneered, although he has never been castrated, his power is equivalent to the chief steward around the Emperor. Some people even call him the 9,000 years old in private. No one in the Nanyu court dares not to give him face. He is not a powerful minister, but his current status and power are no different from those of a powerful minister. Xie Jin's eyes deepened, he is good at both civil and military affairs. He is good at both civil and military affairs, Jean Rouault said calmly, but Mr. Xie can refer to the character and ability of the Emperor of Nanyu. Under the current situation, he dares to covet the Queen of Dongling, and his confidants allow him to have such delusions. It can be seen that there is no fixed standard for being good at both civil and military affairs. Being good at both civil and military affairs is good at both civil and military affairs. Xie Jin raised his eyebrows, and the smile on the corner of his lips was a little more playful. Tisk, Xie thought he had met an opponent, but after listening to what Prince Jean Rouault said, it seems that he is not that good. Jean Rouault said calmly, underestimating the enemy is a taboo in the army. Well, he does not underestimate the enemy. He decided to meet this person tonight to see how good he is at both civil and military affairs.